In the heart of eastern Nigeria, nestled between the winding path of the old Mbala River and the ancient baobab trees that reach toward the heavens like gnarled fingers of forgotten gods, there lay a village called Nyoka. Nyoka was not just any ordinary village, it was a land steeped in legends and whispered secrets, where elders spoke of spirits that roamed the earth under moonlight and of creatures that could take the shape of man or beast at will. The people of Nyoka lived closely with nature, following the rhythms of the seasons and the calls of the wind. They feared and respected the unseen world, and nothing was taken for granted, not a birth, not a death, and certainly not a wedding. It was in this village that a young woman named Adogo was born. She was found one rainy season, alone and crying near the banks of the river, wrapped in palm fronds and with eyes that shimmered like the scales of a python in sunlight. No one knew who her parents were, but the village elder, Mama Nyar, who had long served as the midwife and keeper of oral history, insisted that Akin was a gift from the river spirits. Despite murmurs and suspicions, the villagers raised her as one of their own. She grew up graceful and composed, with beauty so disarming that men lost their words in her presence and women often looked twice to make sure she was real. But Akin was never like the others. She never played in the dust with the other children. She could stare into the eyes of a wild animal and make it back away. Her presence felt ancient. They loved her, yes, but even as they did, they whispered prayers under their breath whenever she passed by. As Adogo grew older, the whispers only grew louder, though never in her presence. To her face, the villagers wore smiles and offered fruits or beads in admiration, but behind her back, old women clutched their cowrie shell necklaces tighter, and the village boys dared each other to follow her into the forest. None ever did. She lived with Mama Nyar, who had long since taken her in as her own child. Their hut stood slightly apart from the others, not in exile, but out of quiet respect, or perhaps fear. Adogo's ways were peculiar. She never ate meat, yet her strength surpassed that of even the strongest women in Nyoka. She could carry 3 calabashes of water on her head from the river without spilling a drop, and her movements were too fluid, almost like a dance with no rhythm but her own. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened, as if her voice carried something older than the language itself. She never fell ill, not even when a fever took half the village one harmattan season. While others coughed and sweat through the nights, she would sit by the fire, eyes fixed on the flames, unmoving for hours, as if in a trance. Mothers began to tell stories about her to warn their daughters. Her beauty could be a curse, how not all orphans were blessings. Still, no proof of wrongdoing ever surfaced, and Adogo lived quietly, harvesting cassava, helping Mama Nyar brew herbal remedies, and attending market days like everyone else. But the unease lingered. The village dogs never barked at her, in fact, they slinked away whenever she approached. Birds stopped singing when she passed under trees. Nature seemed to pause for her, in awe or in fear. But no one dared say it aloud. It was during the season of the long rains that Okoth, the blacksmith's son, returned to Nyoka from the city. He had left many years before to study under his uncle in Kisumu, learning the ways of metal and machinery. When he came back, his shoulders were broader, his accent polished, and his pockets lined with the promise of prosperity. He brought with him strange tools, city stories, and a new sense of purpose. But nothing struck him more deeply than the sight of Adogo. She was drawing water at the riverbank the first time he saw her again. The silver reflection of the clouds shimmered over the stream, but it was her presence that outshone the water. Okoth stopped in his tracks. She hadn't seen him yet. Her arms, slender yet strong, poured the water with grace into her calabash. Her skin glistened in the humidity, and her eyes, those impossible eyes, caught the light like obsidian. When she finally looked up and saw him, something passed between them, an electric silence, thick as the mist after heavy downpour. He smiled, nervous, uncertain if he'd imagined her reaction. She said nothing, but her lips curled into the faintest, most mysterious smile. From that day on, Okoth was bewitched. The villagers watched the unfolding with dread-soaked fascination. Some warned him, discreetly, subtly, "She is not for you." Others kept quiet, too afraid to interfere. But Okoth was smitten, and youth is often both blind and bold. He began courting her openly, bringing wildflowers, crafting bracelets from polished brass, even helping Nyar with repairs around their compound. Adogo never showed outward affection, but she accepted his gifts, and that alone was enough to set Okoth's heart ablaze. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Adogo had waited for this moment her entire life. In the months that followed, Okoth's courtship of Adogo became the talk of the village. Elders shook their heads in silent disapproval, young girls watched with envy and awe, and the old seers muttered prayers into the wind. Nyar, for her part, remained quiet but watchful. Her old eyes followed Adogo more closely now, as if searching for something hidden behind her serene face. Okoth, however, saw none of this. In his eyes, Ekin was a vision of perfection, gentle in her silence, deep in her thoughts, and hauntingly beautiful in ways he couldn't put into words. He began speaking of marriage, and when he finally approached Nyar with his intentions, the old woman sighed a long, slow sigh. She looked at him with something like pity, or perhaps resignation. "If your heart is set," she said, her voice brittle like dry leaves, "then I will not stand in your way. But know this, Okoth, beauty can be a mask, and some masks are older than time." He laughed nervously, thinking it an old woman's cryptic way of testing him. When word spread that Okoth had officially asked for Ekin's hand, the village stirred like a nest of startled ants. Some said the wedding would bring blessings, others whispered of curses. But no one dared oppose it outright. The bride price was paid, a handsome one, too, with cattle, goats, and crates of fine city fabrics. The elders gathered for the engagement ceremony, reluctant but bound by tradition. Adogo said little through it all, her gaze distant, her smile unreadable. She wore a deep indigo wrapper that clung to her form like moonlight on water. Even the birds seemed to watch her from the treetops, their songs muted. The date was set. The wedding would be held under the ancient fig tree, where all unions in Nyar were sealed. But beneath the celebration and the dancing and the ululations, a silent tension crackled in the air, like the hush before a storm. The day of the wedding dawned with skies as clear as polished glass and a sun that rose slow and golden over the horizon, as though the heavens themselves paused to witness the union. Villagers dressed in their finest, women in bright kikois and geli, men in tailored tunics and curtained cloths, gathered around the great fig tree, which had stood at the center of Nyar longer than anyone could remember. Its roots ran deep, both into the soil and the spiritual foundation of the village. No wedding was considered complete unless blessed beneath its shadow. Drummers lined the clearing, their hands moving in rhythmic unison, and ululations burst through the air like flocks of startled birds. Okoth arrived with a proud gait, adorned in a white agbada, his wrist heavy with coral beads. His smile was wide, unshaken by the glances thrown his way. He was marrying the most beautiful woman Nyar had ever seen. Then came Adogo, walking slowly from Nyar's compound, cloaked in ivory silk, her head crowned with golden cowries that shimmered like stars. The crowd fell into silence as she passed. Children clung to their mothers. A few elders averted their eyes. The drummers missed a beat. She moved like water, smooth, impossible to grasp, her feet seemingly untouched by the earth. Okoth watched her approach with awe, his heart thudding like a second drum. When she reached him, she took his hand gently, and for a moment, all doubts seemed to melt away. The ceremony proceeded without flaw. Vows were exchanged, offerings made, and the old fig tree witnessed yet another promise spoken into eternity. They danced, they ate, they sang. But even as the wine flowed and laughter filled the air, Nyar sat silently beneath the tree, her gaze fixed on Adogo. She did not smile. She did not eat. She simply waited, for nightfall. For what she feared was coming. As dust spilled over Nyoka like ink on parchment, the celebration slowly gave way to quiet murmurs and retreating footsteps. One by one, the villagers disappeared into their homes, some too tipsy to walk straight, others burdened by unease they couldn't name. The drums had stopped. The fires burned low. In the newly built marital hut near the edge of the village, Okoth waited with eager anticipation. The room was fragrant with incense and wildflowers, the bed carefully laid with white linens, and a clay pot of sweet palm wine sat on a small stool beside him. He paced for a while, then sat, and stood again. His heart raced, not out of nervousness, but desire. He thought of her eyes, her silence, her mystery. He felt lucky, honored even. When the door finally creaked open, Adogo stepped in slowly, barefoot, her wrapper now a deep crimson that clung to her like it had grown from her skin. She said nothing. Her gaze held his, unblinking. Okoth smiled, stepping forward to meet her, arms open, lips parting to speak, but the words never came. He froze. Her eyes, those glistening, bottomless eyes, began to shift. They gleamed now not like glass, but like scales. Her skin, once the color of smooth clay, shimmered for a fleeting second like wet metal under moonlight. Okoth blinked. Was it the wine? The incense? He reached out, but her form had begun to change. Her shoulders undulated like something alive was crawling beneath her flesh. Her spine arched in an unnatural motion, and her neck extended slightly, her face narrowing. A sound like hissing wind filled the room. She looked at him, not with love, but hunger. Then she spoke for the first time that night, in a voice that carried the chill of 1,000 rainy seasons. You promised yourself to me, Okoth. And promises are binding. That was when the screaming began. The scream that tore through the night was unlike anything the villagers of Nyoka had ever heard. It was not the cry of a man in pain or terror, it was something deeper, more primal, the sound of a soul being stripped bare. Doors creaked open across the village. Lights flickered to life as trembling hands lit lanterns. Dogs howled, cocks crowed out of rhythm, and the wind suddenly picked up, howling like a chorus of mournful spirits. Mama Nyar was already standing outside her hut, wrapped in a cloak of goat skin, her face hard as calf stone. She did not flinch. She did not run. She only muttered, "It has begun." A few brave men rushed toward the source of the cry, Okota's new home, but the closer they got, the heavier their feet became, as though the earth itself conspired to keep them away. The air around the hut shimmered strangely, the grass flattening in waves as if bowed by an unseen force. The door stood slightly ajar, and a sickly green glow paused from within. No one dared step inside. Then the silence returned, thick, absolute. Not even the insects dared make a sound. Moments later, the door creaked wider, and Adogo stepped into the moonlight. Her wrapper was untouched. Her hair flowed loosely around her shoulders. Her skin looked normal again, though her eyes glinted with something cold and ancient. In her hand, she held Okota's necklace, the coral beads he wore proudly all day, now broken, the string soaked in something dark. "He is gone," she said softly, her voice calm and emotionless. "He broke his vow." The crowd stood frozen, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing or to run. Mama Nyar walked forward slowly, meeting Adogo's gaze. "It was never love you came for," the old woman whispered. Adogo's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "No," she said. "It was blood." Panic did not arrive all at once, it crept into the hearts of the villagers like a slow poison. For a moment, everyone simply stood there, as if frozen in a dream, watching Adogo with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The necklace she held swung gently in her hand, the dark liquid dripping from it forming a quiet, almost sacred circle at her feet. The wind picked up again, this time more fiercely, tearing through the branches of the fig tree as though protesting what had occurred beneath its watch. Then, like a dam breaking, the wailing began. Okoth's mother collapsed to her knees, screaming his name, her hands clawing at the earth. The elders looked at one another, silent and grim, knowing that whatever Adogo was, she was not of this world. Someone whispered, Mamba Wakivilini, the serpent of the shadows, an old legend they used to frighten children into staying out of the woods at night. A being that could walk as a woman but was born of snake and shadow, bound by ancient pacts and driven by hungers no man could understand. But no one had truly believed the stories, until now. Adogo did not flinch at their fear. She looked around slowly, her eyes landing on each person like the blade of a spear. I want no one, she said, her voice oddly calm. You welcomed me. You praised me. You offered me your finest. She looked down at the necklace again. But none of you ever asked who I truly was. Her gaze returned to Nyar. Only you watched. Only you remembered. The old woman nodded grimly, stepping forward. And now the old debt is paid, isn't it? She asked. Adogo said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the forest, the trees parting as if in reverence, and began to walk away. Not a single leaf crunched beneath her bare feet. She didn't look back. The days that followed were unlike any Nyoka had ever known. A heavy silence fell over the village, thick and unmoving, as though time itself had stopped to mourn what had transpired. The people buried what remained of Okoth, though truth be told, there wasn't much to bury. Only his broken necklace, a smear of blood on the marital bed, and a single sandal left at the threshold. His mother refused to eat, her eyes sunken and distant, her hands constantly moving through the air as if trying to grasp his fading memory. The elders held emergency meetings beneath the fig tree, but no one could agree on what to do. We must send word to the mountain seers, one insisted. No, another countered, we must cleanse the land first. The spirit of Nyoka has been stained. But there was no consensus, only fear. Fear of the forest, fear of the night, fear of every shadow that slithered too long across the ground. Children were forbidden from leaving their homes after sunset. Mothers tied charms around their babies' ankles. Even the cattle refused to graze near the path that led to the forest where Adogo had vanished. Nyar was the only one who moved about with calm. She no longer spoke to anyone, but each morning she would walk to the riverbank and pour libations into the water, milk, honey, crushed kola nut, whispering prayers in a dialect older than the village itself. Some say they saw her weeping. Others claimed they saw a great black snake watching her from the reeds, eyes like amber fire, unmoving, unblinking. Whatever peace Nyoka had once known was gone. And though they tried to return to normal, planting, fishing, cooking, nothing tasted the same. The village knew now that evil did not always come with thunder or fire. Sometimes, it came smiling, dressed in silk, asking for your hand in marriage. In the weeks that followed, whispers returned with renewed strength, calling like smoke through every homestead, through every crack in every wall. The name Adogo was no longer spoken loudly. Mothers warned their daughters not to walk with too much grace. Fathers scolded their sons for being drawn too easily to beauty. But deep down, they all knew the truth, that what happened had less to do with desire and more to do with forgetting. Forgetting the old ways. Forgetting that every tree, every rock, every bend in the river held memory and spirit. Long ago, the ancestors had spoken of beings that walked among them, creatures born of water and dusk, who could love and destroy in the same breath. They were not evil in the way humans defined it. No. They were ancient forces, bound by rules older than man himself. Nyar knew this. She remembered the stories not as myth, but as warnings. Adogo had not been a curse to the village. She had been a reminder. A test. A consequence. One evening, as the crimson sun dipped beneath the Mbaila River, painting the sky with fire, a group of the youngest boys gathered around their grandfather, Mzi Omolo, the blind storyteller who sat beneath the fig tree every evening. He was older than anyone in Nyoka, with skin like bark and a voice that sounded like cracked drums. "Tell us about the snake bride," one of them whispered, barely brave enough to meet the old man's gaze. Mzi Omalo tilted his head toward the forest, then back toward the children. "You think it is a story?" he rasped. "No, my sons. It is a warning dressed as a woman. And the next time she returns, it will not be for love. It will be for balance." The boys fell silent, unsure what he meant. But Mzi Omalo just smiled a toothless smile, and the wind stirred the dust around him, like a snake brushing its coils against the earth. The years passed, but the shadow of Adogo's visit never truly left Nyoka. The village grew, as villages do, but there was always a palpable distance between the people and the land. They stopped walking the old paths through the forest, avoiding the banks of the Mbala River after sunset. The fig tree, once a place of union, was now a silent, looming figure in the distance, its twisted branches casting long shadows over the village as if protecting it from some unseen danger. The elders, including Mama Nyar, grew older, their once vibrant voices becoming softer, less certain. They spoke of Adogo as one might speak of a ghost, present, but untouchable, a part of the village's forgotten past. Yet, deep in the hearts of the elders, the knowledge never dulled: Adogo would one day return. It was not a matter of if, but when. A generation had passed since her wedding night, and though life had tried to return to normal, there was an unspoken tension in the air, as if the village was holding its breath. The younger generations did not know the full truth of Adogo's dark nature. They only knew the stories their parents and grandparents had whispered to them, like cautionary tales around the fire. They saw the ruins of Okoth's home, now overgrown with vines and lost to the earth, and they thought it was just another piece of forgotten history. But Mama Nyar, growing frailer with each passing season, had never forgotten. She spent her nights sitting at the mouth of her hut, her eyes scanning the forest as though waiting for something, or someone, to emerge. In her dreams, the voice of Adogo echoed like a distant serpent's hiss. She knew, somewhere deep within her bones, that the balance of the village had not yet been restored. Something was coming. Something that had been waiting. It was during the next season's first harvest, when the rains had just begun to soften the earth, that the signs first appeared. At first, they were small, just a shift in the wind, a strange chill that seemed to linger longer than it should have. The village animals, once calm and domesticated, began acting erratically. Goats bleated in fear, running in circles, while chickens perched atop the rooftops, clucking incessantly into the night. One evening, a group of children playing by the river spotted something unnatural in the water, a coil of dark green, shimmering like the scales of a snake, gliding beneath the surface before vanishing into the depths. By the time the moon reached its full face, the fear that had lived in the hearts of the elders for so long began to seep into the rest of the village. The old women whispered to each other as they prepared meals, their words heavy with warning. The men gathered in hushed councils, deciding whether to fortify their homes or seek protection in the distant hills. Mama Nyar, who had been a rock for so many, stood alone beneath the fig tree one evening, gazing up at its gnarled branches as if asking the spirits for guidance. She could feel it now, the presence, the weight of something ancient stirring in the village once more. A sense of inevitability settled in her chest. She had known this moment would come, but her heart ached with the knowledge that the village was not ready. Nyoka was still too young in its spirit, too naive in its understanding of the world's deeper rhythms. That night, as the wind howled through the branches of the fig tree, Mama Nyar heard a voice, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves, but growing clearer. The voice was familiar, one she had heard before, echoing through her dreams. "You knew this was coming," Adogo's voice said. "The balance must be restored, Mama Nyar. You cannot stop what is already set in motion." The wind died down. The village fell into a heavy silence, and in that stillness, Mama Nyar closed her eyes, accepting that the time had come to face the serpent once again. The next morning, the village woke to a strange, eerie stillness. The wind had dropped, and the air felt thick, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The harvest had been brought in, but the usual excitement of the season felt hollow, as if the joy of the crop was overshadowed by something darker. The first to notice were the children, who found strange markings on the ground by the river, perfect, circular impressions that seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light. They looked like tracks, but not from any animal they had ever seen. Old Mzi Omolo, who had lived longer than anyone cared to remember, stepped outside to inspect the markings, his frail hands trembling as they traced the edges. His eyes narrowed with an unsettling understanding. "The serpent has returned," he muttered under his breath. "It will claim what is owed." As the day wore on, the village felt the weight of the impending disaster. The elders gathered again beneath the fig tree, this time not to celebrate, but to prepare. They spoke in low tones, their voices carrying the weight of years of knowledge that could no longer be ignored. Mama Nyar, who had once been a symbol of strength, now appeared fragile, her face etched with the sorrow of too many forgotten battles. She knew this would not be a simple confrontation. Adogo was not just a woman, she was a force of nature, a creature born from the oldest secrets of the land. The village would have to fight not just for their survival, but for the very essence of their soul. The sacrifices of the past were coming due. By dusk, a chilling fog had descended over Nyoka, cloaking the village in an unnatural shroud. The sounds of the river were muted, and even the birds had fallen silent. A few brave men and women took torches and ventured into the forest, but none returned by nightfall. Fear began to creep back into the hearts of the villagers, as old memories of Adogo's first arrival resurfaced, bringing with them the sharp sting of dread. Mama Nyar stood alone at the edge of the village, her eyes fixed on the distant, darkened trees. She could feel Adogo's presence, like a shadow looming just beyond the veil of reality. The serpent had come again. The balance would be restored, whether Nyoka was ready or not. As night deepened, the fog became thick, almost suffocating, blanketing the village in a strange and unnatural silence. The flickering torches, carried by the few brave villagers who had dared to venture into the forest, seemed like fragile, dying stars in the dark. The trees themselves felt alive, their limbs shifting as though they whispered secrets only the wind could understand. The air, once warm and welcoming, had turned cold, biting the skin with an unnatural chill. Mama Nyar, though older than all, moved with the grace of someone who had long learned the language of the earth. She had not spoken to anyone since her conversation with Adogo in the night, but now, standing at the village's edge, she knew what she must do. The balance could not be restored by words or prayers alone. She had spent decades weaving the old magic, learning the secrets of the land and its spirits. She had known, long ago, that a time would come when Nyoka would face the serpent's return, and it would take all that the earth had to offer to fight her. She took the sacred blade from beneath her cloak, its handle wrapped in ancient cloth. This was no ordinary weapon, it was forged in the heart of the great river, shaped by the hands of the first shamans, meant to cut through the fabric between worlds. With steady hands, Mama Nyar began to chant, her voice rising with the wind. The words were ancient, older than Nyoka itself, and as they left her lips, the earth beneath her feet rumbled, as if waking from a deep slumber. A faint, glowing light appeared at the edge of the village, the first sign that the ritual had begun. As the mist parted slightly, Mama Nyar saw something moving toward her, something slithering through the shadows. At first, she thought it was just the fog playing tricks on her, but then it took shape, tall, slithering, its scales gleaming with an eerie glow. Adogo. She was here, no longer hidden behind the mask of a beautiful woman, but revealed in her true form, a serpent of unimaginable size, its eyes burning like molten amber. "You think you can stop me, old woman?" Adogo's voice was cold, cutting through the air like a blade. "I was never just a bride. I am a force older than your village, older than your bloodline. Your magic is weak. Your land is mine." Mama Nyar's heart raced, but her hands remained steady. "You will not take what belongs to this land, Adogo. You are nothing but a shadow, nothing but a memory. The earth will not allow you to return. The serpent's hiss echoed in the night, but Nyar stood her ground. This was a battle not just for her life, but for the very soul of Nyar. Adogo's form loomed larger with every passing second, her body coiling around the village as if she were reclaiming it, suffocating it in her shadow. The ancient serpent, once hidden beneath a veil of beauty, was now unmasked in all her terrible grandeur. Her scales shimmered with a malevolent glow, and her eyes, the color of molten amber, fixed themselves on Nyar, burning with the weight of centuries. The fog thickened, swirling around them, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. The earth seemed to shift, as if answering a king's call, but Nyar held her ground, her hand steady upon the sacred blade. The chanting continued to pour from her lips, the ancient words like a bomb against the rising storm, her voice now a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the air. Adogo let out a laugh, cold and harsh, reverberating through the trees. You think your prayers can stop me, old woman? You think your blade can slay what has no end? Her body writhed in the fog, each movement like the slow undulation of a massive serpent preparing to strike. Nyar's heart thundered in her chest, but she did not falter. You are bound, Adogo, she called out, her voice rising over the serpent's mocking hiss. Bound by the very bloodline you sought to consume. You may have fed on the hopes of the innocent, but you have underestimated the land you sought to claim. Adogo's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate. Do not speak of things you do not understand, old woman, she hissed, her voice now like the rattle of a snake preparing to strike. You have no idea the power I hold. Nyar closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet, the pulse of the land, the heartbeat of Nyar. She knew Adogo could not be defeated by force alone. She had come to the village like a storm, beautiful, deadly, seductive, but storms passed. The earth, however, endured. The blood of the ancestors ran deep in the soil, and the magic of the land was older than any serpent, older than any curse. She raised the sacred blade high, and the air around them vibrated with a force that felt like thunder. You are a memory, Adogo. A shadow that cannot endure. And with that, she plunged the blade into the earth. The moment the blade struck the earth, a great crack split the ground beneath Nyar's feet, the sound echoing like the roar of a beast awakening from a long slumber. Adogo recoiled, hissing in fury as the very land seemed to tremble in response. The fog parted for a moment, revealing a crack of pale moonlight streaming down from the heavens. In that brief, otherworldly light, the earth itself seemed to pulse with life, as if it had been waiting for this very moment to strike back. Nyar could feel the power of the land beneath her fingertips, the ancient magic of the ancestors coursing through her veins, the weight of centuries of ritual and protection swelling within her. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself, and when she opened them again, the ground beneath Adogo's coiling form began to shift, the earth opening like a great mouth, swallowing the serpent's massive body. Adogo let out a shrill scream, her form writhing in a desperate attempt to escape the pull of the land. The ground groaned, as if it were a beast itself, dragging her deeper into the earth's embrace. The serpent's amber eyes flashed with rage, her fangs bared in a final, terrifying display of power. This is not the end, Adogo hissed, her voice low and filled with venom. I am the serpent of the shadows. You cannot banish me forever. I will return. I will always return. But Nyar, feeling the weight of the earth's power behind her, did not flinch. Not this time, Adogo, she said, her voice resolute, full of an ancient wisdom. Your time has passed. With a final, deafening roar, the ground closed around the serpent's body, the earth swallowing her whole, leaving nothing behind but the faintest trace of her presence. The village fell silent once more, the fog lifting as quickly as it had come. The moonlight now bathed Nyar in a soft, peaceful glow, and the trees stood still, as if watching in reverence. Nyar stood alone at the center of it all, her breath steady, her hand still gripping the hilt of the blade, now half buried in the earth. The battle had been fought, and the village, for now, was safe. But deep in the heart of Nyoka, beneath the soil, beneath the very roots of the trees, something stirred, a whisper, a promise, a reminder that balance was a fragile thing, easily tipped by forces unseen.